And welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this 15th day of February 2022. Well, hi, it's wonderful to have your company once again this morning. And today, it's not as sunny as normally here, but it is a partly cloudy and 23 degrees. Well, it was slightly cooler last night with that little bit of rain that we had in and around the city. I'm not quite sure about all the other areas, but it got quite, the temperature really dropped, which was quite pleasant. It was quite pleasant. So on this Tuesday, we have for you all our general news, and then of course we'll be finishing off with our Daily India report from PIO TV, courtesy of the Gupta family. From right now, are you feeling that pinch of the petrol prices? Why is it, and how long can we expect it to remain that way?
But first, the White House has again repeated warnings that a Russian invasion of Ukraine could begin any day. Senior officials won't confirm US intelligence reports an invasion is planned for Wednesday. Australia has shut down its embassy in Kiev as a flashpoint looms, as the threat of war drives oil prices to the highest level since 2014, as 130,000 Russian troops mass on Ukraine's borders. Brent crude is hitting nearly 96 US. 2 years ago, crude prices plunged to a low of just $20 a barrel when COVID first hit. The rebound from the pandemic has seen demand for oil already on the rise, but markets were roiled on Friday night as the threat of war escalated. Demand is fast outstripping supply, with fears OPEC will be unwilling to fill the shortfall. And that could see Australian drivers and businesses, already paying record prices, slugged even harder at the pump. Oil analyst and head of research for Tribeca Investment Todd Warren says if Russian tanks roll into Ukraine, oil will move well into triple-digit figures.
Yeah, well, lots going on in that part of the world, obviously, and with Russia such a significant contributor to the world's supply of oil and gas, any moves into the Ukraine would be felt significantly in an environment where oil prices and indeed gas prices are already elevated and tightening as we speak.
So Russia is the world's third biggest oil producer. Is there any expectation that OPEC will fill the gap, and could it?
Well, I think there's a hope. Obviously, we've seen some coordinated increases in supply out of OPEC countries plus Russia. But indeed, what we've seen in recent times is, despite their announcements that they would be increasing every month their supply by some 400,000 barrels per day, we've seen a disappointment on that, frankly, in terms of supply. So there is now some concern as to whether indeed they could fill the gap. Russia supplies some 5 million barrels a day of oil into the export market. So I think there are some significant doubts, and realistic and reasonable doubts, really, that OPEC could indeed plug that gap.
Well, Australian petrol prices are at record highs. Just how high could they go?
Well, I mean, there's a couple of factors moving there. Obviously, with oil on the increase, with a Russian invasion of Ukraine, you'd expect oil to move well into the triple digits figures. But then the other contributing factor here in Australia is, of course, the Aussie dollar. If the Aussie dollar was to weaken at the same time, then the impost at the pump would be even greater. It is an ability of our Australian producers to plug that gap, and as we know, we don't produce near enough oil domestically. So both factors very important, and you can expect, unfortunately, ongoing pain in the hip pocket when it comes to filling the tank.
We know, Todd, that businesses here are just starting to recover from the pandemic. It is reporting season. We're speaking to CEOs a lot about inflation and rates on the rise and how that's flowing through their input costs and then for the consumers ultimately. Just how big a hit could this be to the supply chains?
Well, significant. I mean, the problem we face is it's not just oil and gas. It's pretty much all commodities, really, which are very much at the whim of inflation. Now, we've been hearing about the so-called transitory nature of inflation from many market commentators, but the reality is it's seemingly anything but. So what we will see is we expect to see more inflation coming through, and indeed at higher levels, and for a more sustained period of time. Now, what that means is, of course, that for any producer looking to increase supply, their cost of capital goes up, and their ability, therefore, to fund any increase in supply is more challenged. So all of that leads to more challenges, frankly, in the longer term with regards to any increase in supply.
Well, Russia exports 40% of Europe's gas needs. Is there an export opportunity for Australia?
Absolutely, yeah. So, I mean, ironically, three biggest beneficiaries potentially of any Russian invasion into Ukraine are the US, Australia and the Middle East, Qatar specifically. They are the three largest exporters of LNG in the current market, and indeed looking to grow, albeit no LNG export happens overnight. It takes a long period of time. But what we have already seen and what we saw during the European summer, when the Russians started to pull back on their supplies, largely as a political tool, we did see gas prices go through the roof in Europe, and therefore we saw LNG being dragged into the Atlantic Basin and into Europe, of course, and that benefited some of the producers here in Australia as the spot cargo price went through the roof. We've seen that from guys like Santos and Woodside.
Todd Wong, great to talk to you. Thanks for your insight.
An excellent report there, and we can expect those prices. I remember the days when we were reaching the 90 cents, and when we were taking, and then there were talks about how if ever the price goes to $1, what would the petrol pumps do? How would they refix all the petrol pumps, because they were all geared up for the 2 digits, and going into the 3 digits at that time was a challenge. And here we are. Well, that is inflation for you. So everything just keeps going up and up and up. And where does it begin? It begins right here.
It's really been something I've never been through before. I've worked in ICU this time for 30 years in the same unit here at Westmead, and this is unprecedented. The levels of stress, the amount of overtime, we're close to breaking, and we've been at that point at different times for the last 2 years. It's incredibly stressful, lots of mental health issues for staff and droves of staff leaving. So the problem's just been compounded by a lack of support and response from the local health service and from health generally. It's getting really dire.
Daniela, is this a big decision for you to take strike action, to walk off the job today?
It really is. It's not what we want to do, but we feel like we're not being heard. So it's just come to the point where we just have to do something. Something's got to give.
Now, you're after a 2.5% pay rise. You want to see improvements in the patient to staff ratio. Why is the ratio issue so important?
It's really vital. I think it's at the heart of why we're in this situation. We were understaffed in intensive care at Westmead specifically before COVID, and this has just enhanced those shortages and made the situation so dire. If we have mandated shift-by-shift staff ratios, as they do in Victoria and Queensland and WA, then if we're short-staffed, then those states will close beds. So nurses aren't being made to go the extra mile and have unsafe staffing and lack of care for patients. And that's why staff are leaving, because of the stress of looking after 2 ventilated patients, a number of critically ill patients. If we can provide those safe staffing ratios that are mandated shift to shift, then people will stay in the system, and that will be a really great retention strategy. And we just want to provide the safest, best care that we possibly can, and that's why it's such a huge thing that we're striking today.
Daniela, many of your colleagues have left the industry, as Louise was saying. If the government relented Daniela, I'm going to ask you whether you think that nurses and staff would be encouraged not to leave the industry, that they would stop walking away from the job if the pay rise came through, if the staff ratios would change. Would that be enough, given the burnout you've all been suffering?
100%, because the staff feel like they're not being heard. That the work that we're doing, what we're putting into currently, it's just not equating to what we're getting. Especially with the wage freeze last year, at the height of the pandemic, we just felt like nothing was being done for us.
Did you have any second thoughts?
A big slap in the face.
Did you have any second thoughts when the Industrial Relations Commission last night banned this strike?
Not at all. We were still here. We know what's been going on our wards, so we still really wanted to come out and strike.
And Louise, just a last word. You seem to be indicating you've not ever seen anything like this before, as far as the stress that you're seeing on the system.
Yeah, absolutely. It's I've worked here for 30 years. I trained here back in the 80s. We've had different influenza pandemics. We've had influxes of people into intensive care, but nothing like this. And the combination of the staff leaving and the acuity of the patients and just the sheer numbers that we've had, it's just been a sort of perfect storm of events that's just led to so much stress and staff walking away. They're just voting with their feet. So I've never seen anything like it, and it's been really scary, and it's had a huge impact on everyone I work with.
Louise McCann and Daniela Asamar, thanks for joining us this morning.
So there you go. As I mentioned, this is where it all sort of begins from the industrial actions, and of course, everyone's got a right to, do things the way they want. And of course, this is Australia, and everyone's got that equal right. So the balance between, providing quality care and getting remunerated at a proper, fair rate. So that's what's in challenge there. Well, right now we'll go to New South Wales, where the by-election in the weekend. What happened?
Matt Cain, thanks for coming in.
Thank you for having me, Lee.
You said that the weekend by-election results show that the government needs to listen to the message that people are sending. What's the message?
Well, there are a number of factors in these results. There are a lot of local issues, but I think that it would be unfair to say there weren't broader issues for the New South Wales government to consider. The handling of COVID is one of those. This has been a challenge not just for domestic governments, but for governments right around the world. We've seen the Ardern government, Jacinda Ardern's at her lowest approval ratings at the moment. So our different has faced the same challenges that everyone else has faced. We need to now get back to focusing on keeping the community safe and getting us through stronger on the other side.
So what do you think is the issue, that restrictions went on too long and too hard, or that people think we opened up too fast?
I think there are a number of issues out there in the community, but what we do know is that we've been through hell and back for the last 2 years. People were frustrated. They were hoping for a summer of relaxation and reunions with family and loved ones. They didn't get that, so it's understandable they take out those frustrations at the ballot box.
What about federal issues? What role do you think they played?
Oh, look, I mean, no independent observer couldn't say that the last 2 weeks in Canberra helped the Liberal Party. They certainly didn't, but I don't think that was a major cause. Look, I mean, these by-elections were 4 separate by-elections in very different communities across New South Wales. The federal overlay, did have an impact, but it wasn't the major impact.
One of the notable results was an 18% swing against the Liberal Party in Gladys Berejiklian's seat, Willoughby. What ramifications do you think that potentially has for blue ribbon Liberal seats like North Sydney and Wentworth in the federal election?
I think there are huge ramifications. The rise of independents in inner city seats in Sydney and Melbourne is a major threat to the Liberal Party. We've already lost one of our heartland seats in Warringah to a high-profile independent, and what we saw on the weekend in Willoughby, which is a seat almost entirely within the seat of North Sydney, is that an independent campaign, which wasn't well financed and it wasn't well organised, almost won the seat. So this is a huge risk that we face in our heartland seats around Sydney and Melbourne.
So there you go, lessons to be learned there, and of course whatever happens, in any part of the country, it does have effect on other areas as well within that party. Well, it does, and as was quite evident there. Well, right now, moving on, we'll still in New South Wales. So now, have you had your booster? So, number 1, then number 2, then the booster. Talks are now on the table about the 4th vaccination. Here's the report.
This week, a new vaccine, Novavax, is being rolled out with the hope of convincing those who have so far been reluctant to get their jab. But will it be enough to tempt anti-vaxxers too? Norman Swan, presenter of the RN Health Report and the ABC's popular Coronacast, joins us now from Sydney. Good morning to you, Norman.
Hi, Lisa.
We did hear quite a few people saying, I'm waiting for Novavax, or I'm waiting for a particular vaccine. So is this the suggestion then that it's now here? It might be the one that gets people over the line.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'd represent those people as anti-vaxxers. They're people who are anxious, sometimes for spurious reasons, but often for good reasons, that they might have had myocarditis, inflammation of the heart in the past, and they didn't want to risk it again and were advised not to take the Pfizer or Moderna vaccines. Either way, it will get people who were extremely vaccine hesitant, I'd say, rather than anti-vaxxers, over the line. There'll still be 2 or 3% of Australians who won't have any vaccine at all, but for some of those, it will get them over the line.
OK, we've been looking at booster shots. They've been gradually increasing amongst the population, which is great. But of course, like with every other COVID vaccine shot, Norman, they only have a limited shelf life. So after the third dose at some stage this year, maybe later, are we looking at a fourth dose to try to keep us safe?
It's possible, yes, but it's just not certain at the moment, and it will depend on new variants. As we spoke about a couple of weeks ago, we're going to go into a lull after Omicron, which may come to a second wave of Omicron in Australia in winter. We'll just the BA2 subvariant of Omicron may turn out to be more vaccine resistant and be a problem. So you just really can't predict how things are going to go. We know now that people who are immunocompromised do need a fourth dose, and even some people who are frail and elderly, even with the third booster dose, they're not as well covered as you'd like, and that does wear off. So it's just not entirely visible at the moment, the extent to which it'll spread. Even in Israel at the moment, they're not spreading it to the whole population. They're keeping it to older people, people with comorbidities, and the immunocompromised. We can't boost our way out of this pandemic. We're still going to have other measures in place.
Norman, what's the latest coronacast looking at as far as how the next pandemic might be prevented?
Well, this one was picked up too late after it had gone into the human population, and we've spent billions, if not trillions, on the economies and on technological developments to actually control it. What if you could control the spillover from animals to humans in the first place? And there's 3 strategies proposed by this consortium of researchers. One is to actually have a network of surveillance of viruses in the wild, and genomics, so that you know what their genetic structure is. The second strategy is to control the international wildlife trade. It is very poorly controlled, and that is a major source of, if you get spillover, of it coming into the human population, and that needs to be controlled. And the third strategy is really just to control agricultural development and stop deforestation, because as agriculture becomes more intensive in areas such as rainforests where it was never meant to be, humans are exposed to viruses they were never supposed to be exposed to. So those 3 strategies, for every dollar invested, they say you'll get $20 back in the future.
OK, just switching our focus away from COVID and finishing up on the Prime Minister flagging as we lead up to the budget, beer excise on draft beer will be cut. I know you've been very vocal about this. Why do you think this is not necessarily such a great idea?
We should not have... Our national alcohol policy is a bit of a mess. It's the responsibility of both parties. We don't tax alcohol like other countries do according to the amount of alcohol in drink. That makes cask wine very cheap and for our most vulnerable communities. And we have got a problem in the over 55s who are not controlling their drinking the way younger people are, and that they do not have the brain reserve to actually take that heavy drinking. And this will increase the volume of alcohol consumed, and that is not a policy that you want. Bladder cancer, bowel cancer, breast cancer, accelerated dementia, domestic violence, accidents, those are the things that happen when you increase alcohol intake. And with this reduction, it will be in our most vulnerable populations.
And the most vulnerable would be at the risk? Well, of course, so it would be. Well, before we go to our Daily India report, let's take a look at this report where Jared Hayne wins an appeal over the sexual assault convictions.
Jared, are you prepared to go into custody?
There were chaotic scenes outside court last year when Jared Hayne was sentenced to a maximum 5 years and 9 months in prison. But now he could be calmly walking free from Cooma jail within days after his convictions were quashed. The former rugby league player had been found guilty of sexually assaulting a 26-year-old woman in her Newcastle bedroom on his way home from a Bucks party in 2018. 3 months earlier, in a previous trial, a jury had been unable to reach a verdict. Hayne always maintained the incident was consensual.
I'd rather go to jail knowing I spoke the truth than be a free man living a lie.
But in sentencing, the judge said the Dally M winner was fully aware the woman had not consented. Today, the Court of Criminal Appeal accepted Hayne's legal team's arguments that the judge had given the jury flawed directions, but it rejected an argument the jurors should not have been allowed to see a cross-examination from the previous trial, where the woman yelled "no means no" and swore at Hayne as she left the courtroom. While Hayne's convictions have been quashed, he still needs to apply for bail if he's to be freed from prison before a retrial. A hearing is scheduled for tomorrow, and his lawyers say they expect bail to be granted under the same sort of conditions he was subject to before he went to jail. Sarah.
So, lo behold or lo be upheld? Well, you decide. Well, right now, the federal election, has it been called? It has not yet been called, but it feels that way.
It's been a super Saturday of voting in New South Wales.
After 4 by-elections over the weekend, and there wasn't a lot of love for the New South Wales government.
The New South Wales government has suffered big swings against it.
Go the Liberals! There was plenty of analysis of what this weekend's New South Wales by-election results meant for the looming federal election.
I do think that people do make a distinction between what's happening in Canberra and what's happening in Macquarie Street.
But perhaps less attention was paid to the way the election was conducted. Polling booths were noticeably quiet on Saturday. That's because the pandemic has meant that, for the first time at a parliamentary level, all voters were sent postal ballot papers. It leaves open the question of just how a federal election campaign may be fought, both in terms of campaigning by candidates and how people choose to vote on polling day, even if Omicron, hopefully, continues to subside. Legislation to give the Electoral Commissioner the capacity to change voting rules is currently before the Parliament. The election campaign may not have been called, but the government is already in full campaigning mode.
Prime Minister, welcome back to Adelaide.
And it is not just the government that has been ramping up the attack.
Join the United Australia Party. Stand with me and Craig Kelly.
The negative attack on the opposition by the government, though, is something that usually only reaches a shrill level in the last weeks of a campaign.
He saved his pre-selection. We don't like the Mr. Speaker. Inexperienced leader of the Labor Party.
But it was already getting loud in the Parliament last week.
The Chinese Communist Party, the Chinese government, has also made a decision about who they're going to back in the next federal election, Mr. Speaker. Now that's open. That is obvious, Mr. Speaker.
The Leader of
and
the
they
House,
have picked this bloke as their candidate, Mr. Speaker.
And there has been more on social media over the weekend, and with ministers doing morning interviews today.
We have a Leader of the Opposition who's trying to sneak into government, trying a small...
So let's go and hear from that minister.
What is the first thing you remember about Anthony Albanese in his public life?
I think he comes from Marrickville, so inner suburbs of Sydney, and I think he tries to get around as much as he can. I think he's got a big battle ahead coming into the federal election.
I actually don't have a strong recollection one way or another, apart from him becoming the leader of the party.
It's my privilege now to formally declare Anthony leader of the Parliamentary Labor Party.
Anthony Albanese was elected unopposed as Labor leader after the party's bruising defeat in 2019.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the incredible honour.
It was a shock because everybody expected in the Labor Party to win the election. Bill Shorten expected to be Prime Minister. Anthony Albanese would have been a mid-level minister in a Shorten plebiscite government. Well, of course, that didn't happen. And all those who dreamed of the Labor leadership one day, Tanya Plibersek, Chris Bowen, Jim Chalmers, they were caught flat-footed and were not prepared and ready to run for the leadership because they were expecting to be ministers within days.
I pay tribute to Bill and to Tanya.
Anthony Albanese was ready and he seized that opportunity and he claimed the leadership.
It is time.
I think when I first heard that Anthony Albanese had taken over as leader, I think my first opinion was scratching my head going, really, is he the best they've got?
As the person elected.
I wouldn't have expected him to be leader of the opposition. He doesn't come across as, well, he's not a suit type of man, but that's probably a good thing because, again, he wants to appeal to the general public that not everybody walks around in suits and, you know, works in corporate offices.
Well, corporate officers and suits is not everyone's cup of tea, and as he mentions, he's talking about the general electorate of the country. Well, right now it's time to go to Daily India Report.
Welcome to Daily India Report that brings you glimpses of the changing India. In our first story, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi met former Kenya Prime Minister Raila Amolo Odinga, who is currently in India on a private visit. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi on February 13th met former Kenyan Prime Minister Raila Amolo Odinga and expressed his commitment to further strengthen India-Kenya ties. The Prime Minister's office said that former PM of Kenya is in India on a personal visit and wished to call on Modi, and the Indian Prime Minister was happy to meet the Kenyan leader after nearly 3.5 years. The two leaders have had friendly relations for decades. Modi recalled his numerous meetings with Odinga since 2008 in India and Kenya and thanked him for his support for the vibrant Gujarat summit in 2009 and 2012. The PMO said that the two leaders also discussed other issues of mutual interest. Modi wished Odinga for his good health and future. Odinga was the Prime Minister of Kenya from 2008 to 2013. The US announces the Indo-Pacific strategy to support India's continued rise and regional leadership and expresses concern at China's role in the region. US President Joe Biden's administration released its long-awaited Indo-Pacific strategy. The document focuses on building collective capacity to deal with challenges in the region. China's assertiveness, the pandemic and climate change among others. The strategy document said the US will continue to support India's rise and regional leadership, working with India bilaterally and through groups on a range of issues. It refers to India as a like-minded partner and driving force in the Quad. The policies set out in the document have continuity with the previous administration's strategies. These include a focus on challenges from China, advancing the US relationship, a major defense partnership with India, and supporting its role as a net security provider in the region. There is an emphasis on working with other countries, not just from the region, but also from beyond. The overall increasing focus of the US on the region is due to its increasing challenges, especially from China, according to the strategy document. The US will also work for an Indo-Pacific that is free and open, connected, prosperous, secure and resilient. A senior US administration official reportedly said that India's role in the Quad was an important element of the US-India relationship and a means to speak frankly about issues on the region and to deliver together on public goods. The Quad is rolling out a plan to deliver over 1 billion COVID-19 vaccines to the region by the end of 2020. The Indo-Pacific Strategic Report was released as part of the Quad ministerial meeting with foreign ministers of Australia, India, Japan and the US. The ministers expressed concerns over the adverse Chinese role in the region. The report said that India faces significant geopolitical challenges from China and its behavior on the line of actual control. India sends medical supplies to Pacific Island nation Kiribati after the latter appealed for help to deal with the first outbreak of COVID-19. India delivered medical supplies to Kiribati after the Pacific Island nation appealed for help to deal with the first outbreak of COVID-19. The Ministry of External Affairs said the consignment comprised pulse oximeters, PPE kits and emergency COVID-19 medication. India's Ministry of External Affairs said the medical supplies to Kiribati affirm India's commitment to providing humanitarian assistance and disaster relief support as an early responder in the Pacific region. The ministry further said, despite the logistical challenges in reaching the isolated Pacific Island country, the medical supplies from India were put together and dispatched in a short span of time. The MEA stated that the consignment reached Kiribati on February 12th on board a flight coordinated by the Australian government. Reliance Industries chairman Mukesh Ambani says Reliance will become the world's top blue hydrogen maker. Reliance Industries Limited, helmed by Mukesh Ambani, aims to be among the largest producers of blue hydrogen at a competitive cost in its ambitious green energy transition plan. The Mumbai-based company will repurpose a $4 billion plant that currently converts petroleum coke into synthesis gas to produce blue hydrogen for $1.2 to $1.5 a kilogram, according to a presentation. The blue hydrogen is made using fossil fuels but captures the carbon dioxide formed during its production, and Reliance sees the conversion as a temporary measure until the cost of green hydrogen produced from the electrolysis of water using renewable energy becomes competitive. Ambani, who has built his fortune on fossil fuels, plans to replace sales of road fuels like diesel and gasoline with cleaner alternatives as he seeks to hit a net zero target for his conglomerate by 2035. The project would compete with international plants such as one proposed in Saudi Arabia, which is also seeking to boost hydrogen production. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi urges voters to come out in large numbers and strengthen the festival of democracy. He put a call just minutes ahead of polling in Goa, Uttarakhand and Uttar Pradesh. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi on February 14th urged people to vote in record numbers and strengthen the festival of democracy. Modi made the pitch just a few minutes ahead of the commencement of assembly elections in the states of Goa, Uttarakhand and parts of Uttar Pradesh on 14th February. The Bharatiya Janata Party is the incumbent government in all these states. In Uttar Pradesh, where elections will be held to 403 assembly constituencies in 7 phases, it was the second phase of voting. The first phase was held on February 10th. Goa and Uttarakhand go to the polls for all of their 40 and 70 assembly seats respectively in a single phase. Uttar Pradesh elections are for 55 assembly seats. India successfully launches Earth observation satellite and 2 other co-passengers on PSLV C-52. Indian Space and Research Organization successfully launched the Earth observation satellite on board the Polar Satellite Launch Vehicle in the early hours of February 14th. The launch carried 2 other ride-share satellites into orbit as the Indian Space Agency set in motion work for 2022. The launch was conducted from SAR in Sriharikota to deploy EOS-04 in the Sun synchronous orbit nearly 529 kilometers above the planet. The 4-stage rocket lifted off with a student satellite InspireSat and a spacecraft dubbed INSAT-2DT that is a precursor of a joint India-Bhutan mission in the future. ISRO Chief S. Somnath said the mission of PSLV C-52 has been successfully accomplished. The Earth Observation Satellite 04 is also called Radar Imaging Satellite that has been designed to provide high-quality images under all weather conditions for applications such as agriculture, forestry and plantations, flood mapping, soil moisture and hydrology. The spacecraft will collect observation data in C-band, completing the observations done by ResourceSat, Cartosat and RISAT 2B series. The satellite has an operating life of a decade. The 8.1 kilogram student satellite dubbed InspireSat-1 has been developed by the Indian Institute of Space Science and Technology in association with the Laboratory of Atmospheric and Space Physics at the University of Colorado. The satellite aims at improving understanding of the ionosphere dynamics and the sun's coronal heating process. Its operational lifetime is set for a year. The first launch of 2022 has set in motion ISRO's plans to conduct 18 other missions this year, including the high-profile launch of Chandrayaan-3 to the moon and the much-awaited uncrewed launch of the country's Gaganyaan mission. Telugu superstar Mahesh Babu's next flick, Sarkaru Vari Pata, is gearing up for release. Producers have unveiled the soulful video song titled Kalavati on Valentine's Day. Telugu movie buffs were delighted with the release of the soulful song of the much-awaited romantic drama film Sarkaru Varipata, titled Kalavati. The song features several glimpses of fans' favorite superstar Mahesh Babu and his gorgeous co-star Kirthi Suresh. The duo shakes a leg to the beats of the foot-tapping song. Composed by S. Thaman, the song is a beautiful blend of soul and beats, and fans have been raving about it ever since its release. Sharing the music video of the song, Mahesh Babu mentioned it was one of his favorites as he announced its release, which is scheduled for the occasion of Valentine's Day. The song sees Mahesh Babu deeply in love with Kirthi Suresh, who stuns on screen. Fans lauded the chemistry of the leading duo by taking it on social media. The song was crooned by Sid Sriram, while its lyrics were penned down by Anantha Sriram. Sarkaru Varipata has been a much-awaited film in the Telugu film industry and will be jointly bankrolled under the banners of GMB Entertainments, Maitri Movie Makers and 14 Reels Plus. In breaking news today, the voting for Phase 2 of Assembly elections on all the 70 seats in the state of Uttarakhand, all 40 seats in Goa and 55 seats in Uttar Pradesh was held on 14th February. While the average polling across the 55 seats in Uttar Pradesh was 39.07% till 1 pm, Uttarakhand and Goa saw 35.21% and 44.63% polling respectively. In Uttar Pradesh, of the 55 seats going to polls in this phase, the ruling BJP had won 38 in 2017, while the Samajwadi Party had bagged 15 and the Congress 2. Goa Assembly has a strength of 40 members, out of which the BJP currently has 17 legislators. The incumbent Bharatiya Janata Party is being challenged by Congress, Trinamool Congress and Aam Aadmi Party in a multi-cornered electoral contest in Goa. BJP is hoping to win a second term in Uttarakhand, which has been through a lot of reshuffling and juggling between the chief ministers for the state. That's all for this bulletin of Daily India Report.
And thank you very much, Himanshu, for that. And it's wonderful to get our daily report there. And I'd also like to thank the Gupta family for making that available to us. Well, right now it's time to say goodbye from this segment until tomorrow. And don't forget that tomorrow we will also have the real estate update with Usha Chandra. So 9 a.m. we will have our news channel. And of course at 10 would be the weekly real estate update with Usha Chandra. Until then, it's goodbye from us. It's been wonderful having your company. Always so good to see you. Until tomorrow, it's goodbye. Be good and remain safe.